You might wonder why I chose to compare the HDKing V7 with the Firefly 8 SE instead of the SJCam SJ8 Pro. Well, I did both, and drumroll please, surprising absolutely no one, the SJCam SJ8 Pro is better in almost every way. The SJ8 Pro is in a different class, featuring real 4K at 60 frames per second, true 4K 30 with image stabilization, a little bit better audio and external mic, a better screen, and the list goes on. So if you have the kind of money to spend on the SJ8 Pro, don't cheap out and go for something like the V7. On the other hand, the Firefly 8 SE and the HDKing V7 are much closer in specification and price, so I figure that they're a better comparison. Let's start by comparing the actual cameras themselves. If you want to skip to video samples, use the link in the description. Given its sub $100 price point, the HDKing V7 is surprisingly well built. It's a mixture of metal and plastic that feels pretty substantial in the hands. There's no flex to the body, and it feels more like a premium camera than something at its price point normally would. The Firefly 8 SE on the other hand, it's all rubberized plastic. It's more of that typical old school GoPro build, and not to say that it's bad, it's just not as good. The screen on the HDKing V7 is larger than the Firefly 8 SE, but you know what they say, bigger isn't necessarily better. And that's definitely the case here, because the V7 screen is bright and vibrant, but it doesn't have very good viewing angles. In terms of user interface, the two cameras are more or less the same, just a little bit different color scheme. I do actually prefer the V7 just a hair more than the Firefly 8 SE because the touch scrolling is a little bit smoother. There are two things about the 8 SE that are significantly better than the V7. First of all, the 8 SE has more indication LEDs, so it's easier to see if the camera's recording when you're looking at the cam from the front, or the side, or anything like that. The 8 SE also has physical buttons, so you can navigate the user interface a lot easier when this camera is in its waterproof case. When it comes to build quality and user interface, if I had to declare a winner between the two, I wouldn't, because both cameras each have their own strengths and weaknesses and it kind of balances out. So maybe there'll be a bit more difference in video quality and we can decide which camera is better based on that. Or at least, I hope there's a bit more difference because that would make my job so much easier. Right now, you're looking at a comparison of 4K 30 with image stabilizer turned off. I chose this format because this is the highest real resolution each camera films at, despite the HDKing saying it films at 4K 60. That's not true. I'm gonna be that guy and not tell you which camera is which for a little bit. The reason I'm doing this is because a lot of action cam enthusiasts watch my channel, and we all have our own prejudices towards certain brands. For example, my experience with all-winner cameras in the past has been pretty crappy overall. That's why I was so surprised at how good the HDKing V7 actually does. And now for the triumphant reveal. The left camera is the HDKing V7, and the right camera is the Firefly 8 SE. This is almost one of the biggest upsets I've had in my time reviewing. The V7 fought a damn hard fight, and probably for most viewers, they'll like the video quality of the V7 better. For uploading to YouTube, for people who just want an introduction to 4K, the V7 will work very well, and it's under $100 US, and it's available on Amazon. It ticks all of those boxes. The Firefly 8 SE on the other hand, the color processing is not as visually appealing, however the video does have a lot of room for editing in post-production. It can be made to a very similar color profile with that bright, punchy, contrasty video that looks really pleasant overall. It's just to get to that point requires editing, which is, quite frankly, a pain in the ass. While the Firefly doesn't take awards for its color processing, what it does take awards for is a smooth and consistent frame rate and lots of detail in the video. The other thing that the Firefly does way better than the V7 is image stabilization. There's something a little bit wonky about the image stabilization in the V7. It's like the lens profile is not mapped correctly, so sometimes the edges get a little bit warped and wobbly. The V7 does offer image stabilization at a near 4K resolution. It's not full 4K because it's only 3200 by 1800. The Firefly 8 SE only offers IS at 1080p 60 or 1080p 30. As you can see in this comparison, the image stabilization does make quite a difference at 4K, smoothing out bumps and jumps that the Firefly 8 SE just picks up because it has no IS. On the other hand, when you look at the video closer, there's not as much detail. Everything gets a little bit more, I'd say, smudgy and blocky. It's just not as sharp overall, and that's not just because the image is cropped into the sensor. There's some other processing going on that also takes away detail. The near 4K image stabilized resolution on the V7 is pretty good overall though, and I think if you're watching on a phone or a small screen device, the difference between this and the full 4K won't really be obvious. Moving down to 1080p, we hit the Firefly's sweet spot. 1080p 60 on the Firefly 8 SE is optimized, it's sharp, it's beautiful, color is good, contrast is good, it's a true 60 frames per second, and best of all, it has image stabilization. This is where the comparison in the image stabilization really comes into play, with the V7 being mediocre in comparison. Side by side with the 8 SE, the V7 video might even look better just because of its color processing. However, that's not really the case. There's much less detail overall, which is obvious when you look up close. Again, something about having the image stabilizer turned on really does sort of degrade the quality of video. It's more blocky and there's less detail. Things like leaves can get blurred out, but perhaps the most problematic is that it's not a true 60 frames per second. The V7 seems to be faking its 60 frames per second mode and only doing about 40 to 50. The Firefly 8 SE is much more consistent. It's actually 60 frames per second, and yeah, I counted. If you are going to be primarily using 1080p 60, 1080p 30, the Firefly 8 SE is the way to go. There's one more place that the Firefly 8 SE does way better than the V7, and that is night and low light footage. Again, side by side like this, it's going to be difficult to see the differences, so let's look close up at the video, starting with the V7. As the sun is setting and streetlights turn on, the V7 still does a pretty good job until about 10-15 minutes after dusk when it's really starting to get dark. At that point, the V7 starts to get smudgy and very noisy overall. It really loses detail fast compared to the 8 SE. The 8 SE footage is more detailed, a little bit better color, and just looks nicer overall. In terms of still photos, the 8 SE wins as well. I think the V7 is not taking full advantage of its sensor because it crops into a 4:3 aspect ratio. I'm pretty sure the image sensor is supposed to be 16:9, so it's losing resolution by cutting out the sides. The 8 SE on the other hand takes real 12 megapixel photos that have more detail overall, even if the color is not as vibrant. In terms of audio quality, they're both quite good. However, the 8 SE has the advantage here by including an external microphone. The external microphone is useful in situations where the camera is outside of its waterproof case. For example, when I'm riding my bike with the cams mounted to my handlebars. In that case, the cameras pick up a lot of handlebar noise, so the external microphone comes in handy. Just listen to the audio of these two cameras.
Just to get a little bit more direct comparison between the Firefly 8 SE and the V7 at its full resolution. The reason for doing this is that the V7 actually crops in a little bit to 3200 by 1800 instead of real 4K when you turn on the image stabilizer. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go through the section of woods just like I did with the 8 SE, and about midway through I'm going to switch over to the 4K with image stabilization and then end at the 1080p 60 so that we do get the comparison of both. And look at, now the lighting's back. I think the bike trail is coming up here. So one thing is the Firefly 8 SE does not have stabilization at 4K. That's why we got the gimbal out, because just a chest mount would be bumpy as hell. Anyways, it's going to be a cool comparison nonetheless.
In terms of battery life recording at 4K, the V7 edges out the 8 SE by about 10 minutes of recording, but that could be just because my 8 SE batteries are a lot older than the V7 ones. There's just one last thing to mention, and I didn't know where else to throw it in the video, so here it is. Consistency. The V7 has a couple firmware issues that cause problems while recording video. Most notably, if you change the image resolution, stabilization on and off, occasionally it'll glitch out and, well, not record properly, as you can see here. I think this glitch will come up more often during testing than it would during actual filming because most people tend to set their camera to one resolution and then stick to that. Turning the camera off and back on fixes it. The 8SE though, I've owned for 6 months and it's been consistent in that time. It's never glitched out on me, it's never frozen, and it's never had issues with recording. So if you want a camera that's going to be more reliable and consistent, the 8SE is probably the one to go for. I'm curious what you think, whether you agree or disagree with me based on the samples you've seen in this video, or maybe you have these cameras and you've compared them yourselves. Let me know in the comments below. If you have a comparison that you've done, send me the link. I'd love to know your opinion because quite frankly, this is a tough one. The V7 surprised me. It's actually pretty damn good, and I think it would be good enough for most people as long as they don't really care about things like the video being slightly wobbly or the frame rate being slightly off. For the most part, those things are not really noticeable unless you look for them. The Firefly 8 SE is the better camera overall just because of its consistency, its sharper 1080p, and its better image stabilization. It confuses me that Firefly hasn't made the 8 SE available on Amazon. They're really missing out on a wider customer base because it's one of the best budget action cams. It's not too expensive, the video quality is great overall. It's just a lot of people are wary of importing themselves, so they won't buy it. Again, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.